Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Over the years I've made a whole bunch of different kinds of bracelets, but a really simple type that I make occasionally has been hugely popular. It's on the more delicate side, and I usually put a single stone on it, although you could do it without a stone. It would look nice as well with that. But before we get started, I'd like to thank you for watching the video. If you wouldn't mind, would you hit the like button down below? That helps me a lot. And if you enjoy the content here, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. I am publishing about 2 to 3 videos per week. So with that being said, let's get going. The materials you'll need for this particular project are for the band part of it. We're going to use a piece of 10 gauge square wire, which is relatively thick square wire. I need a little bit of 18 gauge wire. I cut a little 7 or 8 inch piece there. The stone I picked for this one is a little pale aquamarine that I found in my box, and it is a little bit on the deep side, so I'm going to go ahead and use a taller bezel that I keep around, which is a 1/4 inch bezel. And probably what I'll have to do in order to prevent the point on the pavilion sticking out of the bottom of the bezel is I'll have to do 3 separate rings on the inside for it to sit on. If you've watched my video about making a bezel setting for a faceted stone, you'll see how I do that with just some jump rings. So first off though, I'm going to make a bezel for this stone. So we'll get going on that here. Looks like we did pretty good on the size there. Okay. I should say that this particular style of bracelet also looks good with a small round cabochon stone, especially if you have a really pretty stone. But like I said, you could do just about anything with this one, even do it without a stone. So, alright, now we need to make the little rings that go inside of here. Set that to the side. So I was making sure that this was flush with the bottom here, and that the two rings sitting on top of it are pushed down, so where they're sitting completely on top of the other ring. You don't want either of them riding up like that a little bit, which happens on occasion. So now, the easiest way to solder these is to get them fluxed, at least from my experience, and then set them right on top of some solder. So I'll take a few pieces of these, and I'm going to file the bottom flat when I'm done. So I'm going to use plenty of solder there. I used 4 decent sized pieces. Okay, this occasionally happens too, so I have a little gap here in the solder. So I'm going to squeeze that together a little better. There's likely enough solder in there if I reheat this again and get it to flow once again to wick along that seam. But it must not have been quite touching in a couple of spots here. So when I do this again, just to be safe, I'll throw an extra piece or 2 of solder under there. Just going to flux the bottom while it's upright and then flip it back over. That looks a little better to me. Now we just have to do a little filing here to get this down. It's getting to be time for me to replace my file. These get dull after a while. And one side of this one is much sharper than the other side. So. Oopsie. Decent. Now to our bracelet part. So we're going to use a piece of 10 gauge square wire, which I like to keep some of this around. It's useful for a couple of different things. And it's going to have a little kind of a swirl in the middle on this type of bracelet. And to make that happen, what we need to do is we need to bend this into kind of a hairpin shape. And you can mark the center if you want. In fact, I will just for the purposes of this video. I don't usually do it anymore because I just kind of eyeball it. But a lot of people like to measure things. I only measure things when I have to. There's a marker here. So I cut a piece about 6 1/4 inches long, so 3 1/8 would be the center, but I'm going to go about 1/4 inch off to one side. There it is. And that's where I'm going to try and concentrate the curved bend that I'm going to create here. So I grab it like this. With square wire, when you bend it into a curve, it has a tendency to try and twist sideways on you. So if you use a pair of the wide nose flat pliers like this, it makes it easier to control that so it doesn't do it so bad. I'm pushing it past itself a little bit to make sure this curve here is a relatively tight curve, and then I'll pull it back a little bit. And kind of a shape like this. All right. So the other thing we're going to do, I forgot to cut this off of the end here. I got a little cut mark there, so I'm going to snip that off. This doesn't have to be beautiful because I'm going to pound this and probably file it down a little bit anyway. But our next step is going to be to do a little hammering. I'll turn the sound down when I do this, but I'm going to flatten out, about this much of the inside of the bracelet here, and it's going to be flattest at this end and gradually taper back into the thickness that it is up here. So I'm going to be hitting that for a little while with a chasing hammer. You can use a heavier duty ball peen or something if you have one that has a nice smooth head. This takes a little longer with this little one, but I don't have another hammer right now that has a nice smooth head, so looks like this one needs a polish pretty soon too. So. Like that. You can see it tapers then. This is not very smoothly done, so I'm going to try and... Alright, and then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to flatten the ends of these both a little bit so they flare out. So I've kind of flared it so it widens out this way. I can bend this back a skosh. Maybe do a little filing to straighten that out some more. Right now it's super hard because I just pounded on it so much. And what that does is it work hardens the metal, makes it very stiff and springy compared to how it was. And so one of the things I'm going to do to take that work hardening away is I'm going to go ahead and anneal this. And annealing is where you heat the metal up to kind of a dull red color and keep it there for a little bit and then let it cool off. And that takes out that work hardening that you just pounded into it. So it softens the metal back up again. If I tried to bend this right now without annealing it, which I'm going to bend the top right here this way, and it's so stiff you'd probably end up cracking it there because it's so work hardened there. So this will make it softer so we can bend it there. Let that cool for just a minute, and then after it's mostly cool you can stick it in the water and quench it if you need to. Okay, before I file this stuff, it's important when you go to bend this here, you want the bend that we're going to make on the end of this thing to be concentrated right up near the top here. You don't want these two sides to bend down low like this, and you'll see why in just a second when I do this. But the way I do it is I usually grab it with the flat nose pliers up close to the to where the curve is there, and with my other hand pulling towards me and this way pushing away from me, kind of keeps the bend happening right there instead of further down here. So get it started that way, and what we're going to do is just push it the rest of the way. We want it so it lays flat on the table like that, and then we get that nice little swirl going on there. So I need to get this a little bit flatter, but you can see the bend is almost flat on the table. Sometimes I see people not containing where the pressure is being pushed on the bracelet here in order to bend it, and holding it loosely further down here, and then it tries to bend in two spots here and here, and then it looks like it goes woo, like that way up high, and that's not desirable for what we're doing here. Okay. So you want it to lay relatively flat, and what we're going to do is, the reason I did it offset from the center a little bit is so one of these arms was a little bit longer than the other. Okay, and what we'll do is we're going to solder this bezel kind of close into that curve there, and just solder right to the band there. And it's on the longer side, so it will kind of be more in the middle of the bracelet when we curve it into the bracelet shape. So Before I solder this on, I think I may do a little cleanup on these here by filing. Just round these out and get them looking a little smoother, more regular. It's got a slight twist up this way, so I'm going to try and bend that down a little bit. Okay. So you want to make sure not to solder it right to the twist here. If you solder it to that, sometimes if your bezel is short, you may have trouble setting your stone because you don't have enough bezel left above the stone in order to set it. So make sure you have a little gap between the swirl and the actual bezel here. I'm going to cut myself some solder. This is again one of those situations, as I've talked about in some of my other videos, where you have a large disparity in the mass of the pieces that you're trying to solder together. This little bezel has very little mass compared to this big heavy 14 or 10 gauge wire. So most of the heat needs to be applied to the bigger piece in order for those to come to the same temperature at about the same time. You can almost avoid the bezel itself because it's so small comparatively. So I'm going to be pumping the heat into the band part here. Oops, I lost my little ball of solder there because I was yakking too long. Alright, so I'm going to heat the band mostly first. Might even turn my torch up a skosh. I say skosh a lot. I'm not sure where I picked that up from. One of my past silversmithing students, I think. I'm just going to heat it to make sure I got a good, both of these up to the right temperature here. Make sure that I get a good solder joint. So now I'll need to let this pickle for a while, and then I will clean it up with a Dremel, and we'll set the stone and I'll polish it. So I did a little dremeling and a little bit of filing, and I got things ready to set the stone. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and then I'll polish it, and then I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. You'll notice I bent this a little bit this way in order to expose the outside of the bezel so that I could access it with the Dremel to smooth it out a bit, and also make it easier to file down the bezel to the appropriate height, which in this case would be just slightly over the girdle of the stone, so that we have just enough to grab onto it. doing a faceted stone in a bezel, I usually give it a little poke from behind, some pressure to make sure it's not going to pop out of there. So now, last step is I'm going to polish this. It's much easier to polish these when they're flat like this. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it like this until I'm done. And I'll bring you back the final piece when it's done. So here's the polished piece. I haven't rounded it out yet, but most of the time with these little thin ones I just use my hands. Or occasionally you could use one of those nylon covered pliers to prevent yourself from dinging up the metal. One of the advantages of doing it the way I'm doing it here is I'm bending these areas back and forth, so it's kind of work hardening it, which will make it a little stiffer. Use these guys here. So that's kind of a cool little swirl bracelet. Not sure what to call these. We'll come up with a name for them for the thumbnail. So, and I'll get a better picture and put it at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Okay, as you can see, that wasn't too terribly complex of a project. A little bit of hammering, a little bit of soldering, and one stone setting, so not too bad. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe to my channel if you would. I'd love to have you as a subscriber, and I love to get comments, so feel free to leave comments, suggestions for videos. I oftentimes try to respond to those suggestions as quickly as possible. So thanks for watching. Happy silversmithing.